Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. I know it's been a long time since my History of Crete series was active, and as stated in my Peter Revish video, upon further research, my first video in the old version of this series was unlisted because it was significantly inaccurate. I came across several research articles that quite clearly stated my previous understanding of the history of pre-Mycenaean Crete was simply wrong. So I wanted to redo this series and give myself more time in between each upload and to do better and more thorough research, of course. And so this is the restart rather, of my History of Crete series. But this time we are going to be going far more into depth in each time period. So rather than simply being a 3-part series as the original was, this series, once completed, will include 9 episodes. This episode, the first, will be on the entire pre-Minoan history of Crete from its geologic formation to the start of Minoan culture. Then the rest are, in order, the Minoan era, the Mycenaean era, the Roman era, the Byzantine era, the Venetian era, the Ottoman era. The penultimate video will be what I've dubbed the Era of Wars, which will include the First and Second Balkan Wars, the First and Second World Wars, the Greek War of Independence, the Greco-Turkish Wars, and will conclude with the Greek Civil War. As you can tell, hence why I dubbed that time period the Era of Wars. And lastly, the final episode will cover so-called modern Crete, which includes basically everything post-Greek Civil War up until the modern day. So with all the preamble out of the way, let's dive into prehistoric Crete. 500 million years ago, what is now Crete was under the Tethys Sea. It would be another 200 million years later that the dinosaurs would roam. Here, ancient sea life collects on the seafloor, which will one day comprise the limestone that dominates Crete's geology. Over the next nearly 400 million years, tons upon tons will accumulate, forming the massive core of the island itself. Of course, we don't call all sunken collections of limestone at the seafloor island, so what changed this mass of rock's relationship with the sea level to force it above it? Well, the force of the 2 largest continents on Earth colliding might just do the trick. 20 million years ago, Africa and Asia are on a collision course, and Crete is at the center of it. The grinding collision not only causes earthquakes under the ground, but above on the surface, the land buckles and folds upwards. And as the continents keep trying to move forward, it pushes the buckles even further until around this time, Crete fully emerges from the sea at last. For a time, it shared a land connection with Africa, however it was, in geologic terms at least, quickly cut off by the sea, and thus many species experienced either insular dwarfism or insular gigantism, giving us an unrecognizable and fascinating canvas of ecosystem on Crete in the past. The Candiocervus deer genus had a species as short as 16 inches or 40 centimeters at the shoulder when fully grown, and had what can be described as club-like antlers, as has been described in most literature I read at least. It also appears to have both grown at a slower rate than most modern deer species, and also on average have longer lifespans to compensate for the slower growth rate. It appears their extinction would ultimately come from a mix of gradual erasure of their preferred environments due to the climate reasons and that changing on Crete, in a combination with possible human overhunting, although the latter is not universally agreed upon by any means as having been a factor, from what I could read. There was also mice up to 3 times the size of the average house mouse, aka their most common ancestor. This house was known as Mus minotaurus, which is an awesome name. Ultimately, when humans arrived with the new species of house mouse from the mainland, that outcompeted the species, and it's believed to have been the cause of its extinction, unfortunately. And before the Mus minotaurus, there was an even larger rodent species on the island known as the Cretimis, or the Cretan giant rat. There was also an otter species, heavier and more adapted to terrestrial locomotion than its close relative, the smooth-coated otter, which was also found on Crete at this time, known simply as the Cretan otter. And it's believed that the hydrology and geography of Crete itself played a role in pursuing the adaptation of this species to more land-based locomotions. Relative to its counterparts, of course, it was still a good swimmer. There was also a species of mammoth, only 40% the size of some of the largest species of mammoths that also inhabited the island with these other fascinating, unique species. And of course, last but not least, one of my favorites, there's this massive species of owl, over 3 times the size of its closest living relative, well there was, known simply as the Cretan owl, and it had unique adaptations such as slightly longer wings and significantly longer legs that experts suggest reflects a more terrestrial lifestyle than the typical species of owl. This, of course, was all well before the first humans ever arrived, though. Roughly 120,000 years ago, however, that would change. the first humans set foot on the island, permanently changing the landscape forever in a rather haste. For the first few generations, it must have been a paradise with much better weather and way less natural threats than on the mainland in general. In time, though, all the aforementioned species that we just talked about were so thoroughly decimated by the first people and the changing landscape that they all went extinct. It's no surprise then that the groups on the island, now in a much more desperate land than they were when they had arrived, at least, biologically speaking, quickly adapted. Agriculture, dogs, pigs, sheep, goats, and cattle were quickly widely adopted once they were introduced. Unlike other island environments in which these innovations were introduced where the original habitats were largely replaced, such as like in the case of the first farmers in Britain replacing the largely hunter-gatherer previous society for the most part, it appears the indigenous Cretan people remained, and that the latter groups such as the Minoans were actually directly descended from the first Stone Age migrants to Crete. Again, as stated earlier, these first people arrived 120,000 years ago by all evidence. To put that in perspective, we're closer in the modern day to the first humans arriving in Australia than those first Australians are to the first settlers of Crete. Hell, most Google results will still tell you that humans hadn't even left Africa yet at that time, so this is like groundbreaking new research, so that was fascinating to come up on. We should keep in mind that when talking about timescales in the thousands of years like we have been thus far, that while on a day-to-day basis, Crete has a very idyllic climate, obviously, hence all the tourism and stuff. On a longer-term scale, the island is actually somewhat ideal at a glance. Being in a fairly hot and dry climate leads to regular forest fires. Also, the very plate boundaries that made the island rise from the sea in the first place are a source of endless earthquakes and volcanic eruptions on the surrounding islands, one of which is believed to have partially, by many scientists, partially played a role in ending the Minoan civilization. Both of which, the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions, also lead to devastating tsunamis. As far as any bits of land other than small islands, the island is somewhat isolated from Mediterranean Island too. You're 60 miles or 97 kilometers from the Greek peninsula, 111 miles or 179 kilometers from the Anatolian peninsula, and the largest artistic influence in the following Minoan period, the Egyptians, were over 285 miles or 460 kilometers away. Even if they sailed straight to Egypt across the sea, it would easily take several days straight of sailing each way at the very least. However, based on the dispersal of trade goods, it appears some Minoan sailors would often hug the islands of the southwest corner of Anatolia and then follow the coast of Asia, all the way along to Egypt, stopping at ports for resupply and trade along the way. This longer route would have required sailors to spend months at a time from home, clearly no small undertaking. However, if we flip our perspective just a bit around, we can come to some interesting insights. As it turns out, for people sailing off in the eastern Mediterranean region, the island of Crete is actually one of the largest for miles, and is especially relatively abundant when it comes to plains, with the only comparable island being Cyprus. The closest other regions for good agricultural options are the plains of Thessaly, all the way in central Greece, or the aforementioned island of Cyprus, both of which were controlled by relatively significant powers by the time of the Bronze Age. Thus, from the perspective, despite the dangers Crete was in, it was in a somewhat ideal location, especially eventually by the era of the Bronze Age. So over the next 7,000 years, these changes brought in by new trade relations that emerged and formed and altered the way of life on the island would give extensive pottery use, overseas trade, agriculture, and change the people who were previously the Stone Age inhabitants of Crete to who we would now call the Minoans. And with that, that's the end of this episode. I hope you're all looking forward to the next one. I'm aiming to upload these at a roughly the same pace as the Rewriting the Elder Scrolls series, going once a month, or one episode a month, sorry. So yeah, love you all. Sorry I sound a bit sick in this one because I am. But I had enough energy to get this video out, and hopefully I didn't sound too bad and it wasn't too bothersome. But anyways, yeah, love you all and have a good one.